This subcommittee focuses on issues relating to criminal justice. And today we're here to discuss what I believe is our responsibility to keep the people held in custody in our country's prisons and jails safe as a matter of that high ideal of justice. This reflects this subcommittee's broader purpose of ensuring that our criminal justice system is fair and balanced, and to improve public safety for all of our communities. As the only senator now that currently lives in a low-income, really below the poverty line community, I want everybody to know I take crime seriously. We have a lot of crime challenges, and there is a lot of issues that we contend with in the communities in which I live. It's not often that we can report some successes, though, and I think it's by no part the acts of Congress who've helped us support a lot of the change that we're seeing. Just 2 days ago, the FBI released its 2023 crime statistics, and reports show that violent crime in the United States dropped for the third straight year in a row, with rape dropping nearly 10% and an 11.6% decrease in murder and manslaughter compared to 2022. This is actually the biggest one-year drop in murders ever reported by the FBI, or reported in the last 20 years by the FBI. And this is a remarkable reversal from the end of 2020, when the murder rate spiked to increase at a pretty significant rate. I'm grateful again for Congress and what we've done in a bipartisan manner to help empower our law enforcement. We know we've made tremendous investments in public safety. Under the American Rescue Plan, the administration provided over $15 billion to communities to hire more police, equip first responders with life-saving tools, and expand community violence interventions. It's passed common sense gun safety laws, many of which we've done in a bipartisan manner to get more illegal firearms off the streets. It is these investments that really have helped to bring down the historically high crime rates we saw at the beginning of this president's term. We also learned this week that overdose deaths declined nationally by 10% between April 2023 and 2024. Non-fatal overdoses are down 10%. And again, this is a tribute to bipartisan work by this committee and others to take common sense approaches to the crisis in overdoses. We've seen a lot of good work done. But today's business is a different aspect of our challenges with crime in America, and this will be an important discussion. We're here to discuss the prevalence of sexual assault in our country's prisons and the successes of failures of a specific bill called the Prison Rape Elimination Act. I want to acknowledge again the courage of our witnesses who will share their personal and painful experiences that they've had while incarcerated. Your powerful stories make clear that Congress must do all it can and do to ensure people's safety and security. I also want to advise everyone in attendance and those watching this hearing online that today's hearing will feature discussions of rape and sexual assault and other challenging topics. 21 years ago, Congress unanimously passed a bipartisan bill, the Prison Rape Elimination Act, also known as PREA. The bill was championed by a broad coalition that included evangelical Christians who were outraged by the epidemic of rape and sexual violence in prisons, and organized together in an extraordinary way. Evangelicals from all around the country, including my state, organized themselves to ensure that incarcerated people were treated with dignity and protected while in custody. This coalition was led by a guiding principle in Scripture that is actually one that's guided my life. It's Matthew 25, chapter 40, that says, truly I tell you, whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers and sisters, you did for me. This is the truth, how we treat the least of us. It's defining to who we are as a people, and I believe who we are as individuals. How we treat the least of these is how we should be judged. This truth was enshrined by our founding fathers' constitutional ideal that everyone should be free from cruel and unusual punishment. Jeff Sessions, senator then, was a lead sponsor of PREA, and he recognized this tenet of American democracy. During the bill's passage, he said very bluntly, "It is the duty of government officials to ensure that those who are convicted and sentenced to prison serve only the sentence imposed by the judge. Rape is not a part of any lawful sentence." PREA is the nation's first federal civil law addressing sexual violence in correctional and detention settings. It announced a zero-tolerance standard for rape in prisons and aim to make the prevention of sexual assault a top priority in each prison system. PREA ushered in comprehensive data collection, training for tens of thousands of correctional staff, and has provided states with $75 million in grant funding over the last 20 years. But sexual violence in prisons and custodial settings still persists. We were all horrified when 7 correctional officers, including the warden and PREA coordinator, were sentenced for sexually abusing those in custody at FCI Dublin in California. This egregious example makes clear that sexual violence behind prison walls persists and it must be rooted out. Sexual abuse in prisons creates a legacy of trauma for its survivors. Disproportionately, these people are ones who survived prior sexual violence, people with behavioral health needs, LGBTQ people, and especially we see this violence often directed towards our young people. This endangers the communities they re-enter, and it frustrates the mission of law-abiding correctional officers. The overwhelming majority of our correctional officers are heroic, work hard, and often find themselves in a workplace that still has difficulties and challenges. We know our correctional officers are understaffed, under-resourced, underfunded, and not allowed to do the things that they are trained to do. I was really heartened when Senator Cornyn partnered with Senator Schatz, something I believe Senator Kennedy might agree with me is a pretty impressive coalition. But Cornyn and Schatz continued to build on PREA's bipartisan tradition by working together on the Sexual Abuse Services and Detention Act to fund emotional support services to incarcerated survivors. One of my heroes, Brian Stevenson, offers that the true measure of our character is how we treat the poor, the disfavored, the accused, the incarcerated, and the condemned. I'm confident that this subcommittee will embrace its duty to protect the incarcerated people from sexual abuse in prisons. I'm confident that the scripture that has guided my life and Jeff Sessions will actually embolden the spirit of this body. I'm confident that the solutions we will explore today enjoy the same bipartisan united response we saw 21 years to come together and pass PREA. And I look forward to a productive conversation with this extraordinary panel. And I turn now to the ranking member of this subcommittee, to the man who's courageous enough to stand in for the ranking member and really pick up for our colleague. And I just want to turn right now to my friend from Louisiana, Senator Kennedy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator Cotton, who's the regular chairman, sends his apologies. He's very, very sorry he could not be here today. But I'm glad I'm here today, and I'm looking forward to this testimony. I think it was St. Augustine who said, justice is when you get what you deserve. Justice is when you get what you deserve. And you may be thinking, well, that doesn't tell us anything. What do you deserve? But I think it serves as an invitation to all of us as a society to debate what is justice? If punishment is appropriate, what is appropriate punishment? I don't think any fair-minded person believes that rape or sexual violence is justice. It just isn't. And I'm looking forward to learning today from these esteemed witnesses here in front of us, and I am thankful to our chairman for calling this hearing.
I'm again really grateful for Senator Kennedy. I know how busy he is, and his presence here today, I think, reflects his commitment to these issues and the issues of public safety as a whole. And I want to welcome my colleagues, Senator Whitehouse and Senator Padilla. We have, as I said before, a really powerful panel of experts. I'm going to introduce and swear in the witnesses. The witnesses will give their opening testimony in the order that I introduce you, and senators will then have 5 minutes of questioning. If it's okay with the ranking member, I will save myself for last. You can go first, or I'll go to Senator Whitehouse, whichever you prefer, sir.
Let me see, my choice is me or White House. Whatever you want to do.
All right, sir. Then I'm going to actually defer to my ranking member, breaking with tradition. It's time we shake things up a little bit here, and then we'll proceed with Senator Whitehouse. But I first obviously want to turn to the witness testimonies. The first witness is Brianna Wingfield. Ms. Wingfield was born and raised in Los Angeles, California. She currently lives in Dallas, Texas, with her 2 children, ages 16 and 8. Ms. Wingfield graduated from California State University, Long Beach in 2022 with a Bachelor's of Arts in Sociology. She will receive her teaching credential in December 2024. Congratulations, that's exciting. In the meantime, she is working as a substitute teacher for children from preschool to 6th grade. Thank you for being here. Our second witness is Julie Abbate, the National Advocacy Director of Just Detention International. Hope you have big business cards, that's a lot. Where she works with correctional officials, policymakers, and prisoner advocates to address custodial sexual abuse and conditions of confinement. Prior to joining JDI, she spent 15 years in the United States Department of Justice as a senior trial attorney, and then deputy chief in the special litigation section of the Civil Rights Division. We thank her for that service. And she was there responsible for enforcing the Civil Rights of Institutionalized Persons Act. She was a member of the U.S. Attorney General's Prison Rape Elimination Act Working Group, which promulgated the national standards to prevent, detect, and respond to prison rape. She is also a certified PREA auditor. Ms. Abbate received her Bachelor's of Arts degree with a major in Women's Studies from the University of Michigan and her JD from the Howard University Law School, and she was magna cum laude. Our third witness is Bonnie Hernandez, a mother of 2 daughters, a grandmother, and the daughter to a retired United States Marine. She is a former employee of a Fortune 500 company, an avid reader, and a returning citizen who served 12 years in a federal prison. Bonnie is also a survivor of sexual violence perpetrated by a Federal Bureau of Prisons officer during her time in custody. The now former BOP officer was convicted and sentenced for his criminal actions. Bonnie was released from prison in May of 2024, 2 years early, thanks to compassionate release and the new Sentencing Commission policy statement that allows survivors of sexual abuse to petition the sentencing court for a reduced sentence. Bonnie earned her GED and attended Penn Valley Community College before her time in prison. While in custody, she taught a number of classes, including GED, behavioral health, and world history. She now resides in Lee's Summit, Missouri, a suburb of Kansas City. Our fourth witness is Kenneth James, Director of Settlement Compliance at South Carolina's Department of Juvenile Justice. And with no disrespect to our 2 South Carolina senators, perhaps the proudest South Carolinian in the Senate right now. Mr. James served as the Division Director of Compliance and Standards and the agency PREA coordinator for the South Carolina Department of Corrections. Before transferring to South Carolina Department of Corrections in 2019, he served as the PREA coordinator for the South Carolina Department of Juvenile Justice, and in multiple leadership and management positions for over 17 years. He also served as a correctional officer, sergeant, lieutenant, and captain at the South Carolina Department of Juvenile Justice. Mr. James holds a bachelor's degree in criminal justice from Limestone College and a master's degree in criminal justice, public administration from Liberty University. It says here that Senator Cotton would introduce the other witnesses.
You want me to do it?
Yeah, okay.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Brandy Moore White, welcome. Ms. White is the national president of the Council of Prison Locals. That's a union representing about 30,000 correctional officers and staff. Before she became that organization's president, she was its national secretary-treasurer for 6 years. I'm happy she was able to take time out of her busy schedule to fly here from Arkansas today and be with us. Ms. White is here to shed light on on some aspects of sexual abuse in prisons that has not received the attention it deserves, and we welcome her today.
Can I add, Brandy has been here numerous times before. I'm going to punch her card. She might get a free sub. She's been willing to come here to the Senate so often. She's been a tremendous witness in the past. I'm just so happy you're here again, and your testimony will be invaluable. Thank you.
Our final witness is Ms. Kelsey Bolar. Am I saying that name right? Ms. Bolar is the Director of Storytelling and a Senior Policy Analyst at the Independent Women's Forum. That's an organization that advocates for women, supports opportunities for women. Thank you for your work. She is also a Senior Blankley Fellow at the Steamboat Institute. Kelsey has worked extensively on the topic of biologically male transgender inmates in women's prisons. She recently co-produced a mini documentary series entitled, quote, "Cruel and Unusual Punishment, the Male Takeover of Women's Prisons," end quote. I also have a letter, actually it was given to Senator Cotton, but he's not here. I have a letter addressed to Chair Booker and addressed to Senator Cotton from Ms. Ami Ikikawa. Am I saying that right? Say that again. Ichikawa, okay. Amy, okay. Amy is a former inmate at a women's prison. She was interviewed by Ms. Bolar about her experiences in prison. The letter provides insights into the protections that the Prison Rape Elimination Act provides, but also discusses how enforcement and accountability has been lacking in women's prisons. And Mr. Chair, I ask of consent to submit that letter for the record.
Absolutely no objections.
And thank you to all of our witnesses.
I'm going to now ask everybody to please rise from your chairs and raise your right hand and answer this question, hopefully all in the affirmative. Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you are about to give before the subcommittee will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Let the record show that each witness has answered in the affirmative. You all may step down. That made for a great picture as well. Okay, you all will have 5 minutes for your opening statements. And I think I said in the order of the introduction, why don't we just simply go from Ms. Wingfield and work our way down to our proud South Carolinian. Why don't we start with you, Ms. Wingfield? Thank you.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Chairman Booker and Senator Kennedy, for inviting me to tell my story. And thank you to my fellow panelists for your courage and for being here today. I appreciate the entire committee considering this issue and inviting me here as a witness. It's going to take all of us to fix this broken system that has damaged and appended so many lives. My name is Brianna Wingfield. I currently live in Dallas, Texas. I was born and raised in Los Angeles, California. My story is no different from thousands of others. At 14, I was hungry, poor, and alone, with only my grandmother around to raise me. We needed money just to go to McDonald's, and there was never enough to eat. One day, my friend and I stole a woman's purse at a laundromat. We ran off with it and turned the corner. When I looked inside the purse, I saw a pacifier and realized she had a baby. I made a mistake that day and took the money, but insisted that we return the purse. We were arrested and charged with robbery. That woman came to our hearing and pleaded with the judge to let us go. We were only 14 years old, starving and suffering, and just trying to survive in a system that was stacked against us. I didn't think it could get much worse. I could have never expected what was to come. I was first placed at Los Padrinos. Deputy Probation Officer Delatorre transported us and forced 2 girls to have sex in front of him in the van. He made me show him my breasts and touched them, kissed me on the mouth, and made sexual comments. This also happened in a juvenile holding cell at the Compton, California courthouse. Imagine being in a holding cell as a child, awaiting your hearing, and you are sexually assaulted. The fear was terrifying. I complied because I didn't want to receive a harsher sentence. That threat was always held over us. Where were the supervisors? No one interfered or protected us. What kind of system works this way? An unlawful system. I was then sent to Juvenile Probation Camp Joseph Scott in 2005, which was supposed to provide support and rehabilitation. Instead, I was sexually abused almost daily. A particular guard, Jeffrey Eckler, forced me to perform sexual acts with other young girls while he watched and touched us. He leered at me while showering, always hiding behind his sunglasses. These are the examples of the horrific abuse I endured at Camp Scott. I couldn't tell anyone for fear of punishment or retribution. I didn't know who I can turn to and report the abuse. We were never offered any type of support. We were never told we could report the abuse to or make formal complaints. Even the female guards participated and turned a blind eye to the brazen abuse inside those walls. It didn't feel like there was anywhere to turn or that anyone was safe. Guards would offer some girls treats or other benefits if they complied with sexual demands and orders. We were threatened that refusals would result in more punishment. The abuse was sexual and deeply psychological. I was terrified every minute of every day and just wanted to be released, to go home. I did what I needed to do to survive. I was just a child. All of us who had spent time at these camps would never be the same again. We were promised at Camp Scott that we would be protected, but all the girls experienced rape and sexual assault. No one was protected, and every single one of us was abused in ways you cannot imagine. And that still haunts us. It was a nightmare that I've never been able to shake. These were not rehabilitation camps. They were nothing more than concentration camps. I've worked hard to move on from my abuse, violence, and suffering. I've devoted myself to my work as a substitute teacher, but just like before, I am fighting back against the system stacked against me. Because I am not a full-time employee, I have not been able to get access to health insurance. I do not have a therapist. In moments where I have not seen a way out, I've had to call the crisis hotline after hotline, grasping at anything to keep me alive. Though I've worked hard to build a life beyond Camp Scott, I carry this weight with me everywhere I go. It's hung over me for decades. But being here, telling my story, it gives me some hope. This investigation is long overdue because the Prison Rape Elimination Act of 2003 isn't being enforced. It isn't working. It's not enough. Countless women and girls are still being raped, abused, and violated in every way possible. Each day that goes by is another day where this cycle of suffering continues. I think of the young girls incarcerated as we sit here right now, this very moment, and know in my heart they are still not safe. You all have the power to protect us, to protect all girls and women. So I'm asking you today to not only listen to our stories, but to please do something about it. Thank you.
Thank you for your courageous testimony, Ms. Wingfield. Ms. Moore White.
Good afternoon, Chairman Booker, Senator Kennedy, members of the Subcommittee on Criminal Justice and Counterterrorism, and distinguished guests. I want to sincerely thank you for the opportunity to present the perspective of our federal prison system from the professional, hardworking men and women of the Federal Bureau of Prisons. I must once again make mention that for far too long, this conversation has been missing a key element, and that is the professional law enforcement officers who have dedicated their lives to protecting those co-workers and communities and safely housing inmates. The Council of Prison Locals represents nearly 30,000 correctional professionals across the country in 121 federal prisons. These professional law enforcement officers work tirelessly day in and day out in some of the most violent, self-contained cities in the country and keep us all safe from some of the world's most dangerous human beings. Let me start my remarks today by saying that the Council absolutely condemns sexual abuse of inmates. Our job is to ensure that the safety and security of the institutions where we work and sexual abuse of individuals should never be tolerated. While we applaud the goal behind PREA, there are definitely truly some shortfalls. The primary concern is current staffing levels within the Bureau of Prisons. the staffing level is so catastrophic, it has and it will, again, lead to a loss of life. The most efficient way to provide security and oversight is not cameras or technology, it is staffing. This must be addressed urgently, and not only for the protection of our staff, but also for the inmates housed in our custody. Secondly, the level of funding for the Bureau, the money that they receive to achieve its mission, the current funding level is inadequate at best and has caused the Bureau to reduce a lot of things to include training. This hinders our ability to effectively carry out the Bureau's mission of rehabilitation and reintegration, among many other things. While I know there will be a lot of discussion today about sexual abuse of inmates, there's a whole other side to the discussion that Congress needs to be made aware of and needs to address in some substantial way. The fact of the matter is, inmates are frequently sexually harassing and assaulting Bureau of Prisons staff inside our facilities. The Federal Bureau of Prisons could not operate with the almost 10,000 or 30% of our female staff that we currently have. As noted by a recent UN report addressing the effects of females working in prison, the role of females in prison goes far beyond working in women's prisons. In all facilities where presence of women staff can often diffuse potential violent incidents when confrontations arise. The strength of women officers in prison lies not just in their ability to enforce rules and in their courage and resilience, but also in their innate capacity to empathize, make profound difference by fostering a more habilitative atmosphere. The DOJ Inspector General Michael Horowitz noted in a February 23, 2023 report on the Federal Bureau of Prisons' efforts to address sexual harassment and sexual assault committed by inmates towards staff that inmate on staff sexual harassment is widespread. In addition to rape, sexual assault, inmates subject employees to egregious sexual harassment, including exposing their genitalia, exhibitionary masturbation, throwing semen, threats of sexual violence, and a constant barrage of vile, cruel, and degrading sexual comments. I can wholeheartedly tell you female staff are quitting because the sexual abuse to which they are subjected, thereby further worsening the understaffing crisis and further reducing our ability to keep everyone safe inside of the walls in which we work. The prison where inmate sexual misconduct is rampant have the attitude that nothing can be done to stop it, and that this is what the employees signed up for when they agreed to work for the BOP. Despite that attitude, there are prisons where inmate sexual misconduct is not tolerated, and there are steps that can be taken to protect our staff. It is unclear to me why we refuse to prioritize staffing our prisons, thereby protecting our staff and the inmates in our care. Not only has this caused the Bureau to lose staff, but it has cost the agency well over $31 million in just 2 lawsuits alone brought by female staff. In 2016, $20 million was paid to female staff at FCC Coleman, and 2018, $11 million to female staff at FCC Victorville. In the settlements just mentioned, the Bureau agreed to undertake programmatic relief as a result of the class action lawsuit brought by female staff against the agency for failure to prevent inmate sexual harassment. But this was just implemented Bureau-wide this year. This in itself is a step in the right direction, but it is far from the end of the solution. Chairman Booker, Senator Kennedy, and distinguished guests, I look forward to answering any of your questions. Thank you.
No, thank you, Ms. Brandy Moore White. You've had to come here multiple times in the Senate to point out, as we said in the hearing on this very subject, the utter crisis we have in supporting the law enforcement officers who keep us safe and how under-resourced they are. So thank you for, again, making that point crystal clear. Ms. Julie Abbate.
Chairperson Booker, Senator Kennedy, and esteemed members of the subcommittee, I'm pleased to be here on behalf of Just Detention International to discuss the impact of the Prison Rape Elimination Act on custodial sexual safety since it was passed in 2003 and since the PREA standards were implemented or promulgated in 2012. Just Detention International is a health and human rights organization that seeks to end sexual abuse in all forms of detention. JDI was founded by 2 formerly incarcerated survivors of prison rape. JDI is also the only organization in the world that is dedicated exclusively to ending sexual abuse behind bars, and all of our work is informed by the wisdom and the experiences of prisoner rape survivors. JDI knows that sexual abuse in detention is preventable. Prisons and jails with committed leaders, strong policies, sound practices, and adequate funding can help keep people safe. And we have to, because when the government takes away someone's freedom, it also takes on an absolute responsibility to keep that person safe. No matter what crime that person may have committed, rape is not part of the penalty. I've personally been working on this issue of ending prisoner sexual abuse since I graduated from law school in 1993. That's just over 30 years, and my experience informs my testimony here today. I started out first in private practice doing class action litigation, and then, as you heard, worked for 15 years at the Department of Justice, Civil Rights Division, Special Litigation Section. I was honored to be a member of the Attorney General's Prison Rape Elimination Act working group that put out the federal PREA standards. And I've been the National Advocacy Director at JDI since 2018. My work with JDI has, without question, been the most rewarding. It provides the opportunity to work directly with correctional agencies and facilities before abuses occur. The national PREA standards are what provide the framework for those facilities to strengthen their systems and their practices. PREA has created a lot of positive change in correctional facilities, in their policies, in their practices, and how people experience their time in custody, living there or working there. PREA has forced all of us to acknowledge the harms of custodial sexual abuse. Jails and prisons have become a bit safer for incarcerated people and staff through implementing the PREA standards. But is PREA working? I think anyone would be hard-pressed to answer that in the affirmative, having heard Ms. Wingfield's testimony and expecting to hear Ms. Hernandez's testimony this afternoon, or when we hear Ms. Bolar when she testifies about the experiences of the women who have trusted her with their stories. And thank you both so much for being here in person today to share your stories. It takes incredible courage. And these women are sharing these experiences not because it's fun or they want to be here or they like talking about this. They're sharing their experiences because PREA did not work for them. They want to make sure that no other person can say the same thing. PREA failed them, and it's failing other incarcerated peoples. And until PREA works for everyone, we cannot claim success. I've learned a lot about custodial sexual abuse in the past 3 decades, visited over 100 correctional facilities, listened to and learned from incarcerated people and formerly incarcerated people, far too many of whom have experienced sexual abuse behind bars. And I've worked with and learned from countless correctional officials. One of the most positive takeaways from my experience in this field is the dedication of our most hidden law enforcement personnel, people who work in our jails and prisons. In almost every facility I've been in, there are staff members there working not only to do their jobs, but to improve conditions for people who live there and work in those facilities. And as you've heard, those conditions they work under are extremely demanding, and they're getting more so, with staffing levels that are diminishing seemingly daily. Their work is often heroic and almost always unrecognized. I would like to take a minute and recognize the efforts of the correctional witnesses here today, Mr. James and Ms. White. Thank you for being here today and for all you do for the field of corrections. We know it's not easy. So what can we do? 3 things. First, we have to stop relying so heavily on survivors to report abuse. Survivors should, of course, have methods to report. They need to have their voices heard, and their reports should never be ignored. But we simply cannot rely on the most vulnerable people with the most to lose and wait for them to step forward before we take action and do what we know we have to do. Staff also need those same types of external reporting mechanisms, and they need to be protected from retaliation for using them. And leadership must always respond to reports they receive from staff. In addition, investigative staff should use their skills to identify red flags of abuse that's occurring. They should use those skills to uncover abuse, even when survivors can't or won't report abuse, or when staff don't report signs of abuse. Second, We must support people who experience sexual abuse in custody. As we've heard, the effects of sexual abuse are devastating and they're long-lasting. We urge Congress to pass the bipartisan Sexual Abuse Services in Detention Act, led by Senators John Cornyn and Brian Schatz in the Senate and introduced today in the House by Representatives Sidney Kamala-Dove and Kelly Armstrong. The act would ensure that when incarcerated people suffer sexual abuse, they have support to process and heal from the trauma. And finally, Congress should ensure that the grants authorized by the PREA statute and administered by DOJ are consistently and robustly funded. Those grants are designed to directly assist the field with PREA appropriations. And PREA appropriations have remained at $15.5 million for the past 6 years. That's just not enough. Even $75 million over 20 years, if you break that down per year, and if all 50 states got an equal share, that'd be $75,000 a year to implement these types of practices and improvements that can improve safety for folks in custody. It's not enough. In addition to funding grants to states, those appropriations are also used for data collection by DOJ's Bureau of Justice Statistics. While DOJ leverages these funds as best they can to support states, much more is needed. Having such a modest appropriation forces DOJ to curtail certain crucial PREA implementation efforts to support others. And we need more robust funding. And I thank you so much for the opportunity to be here and discuss these issues with you. Thank you so much for your attention.
There you go.
Chair Booker, Senator Kennedy, and distinguished members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to appear today to testify about my experience as a survivor of sexual abuse by a BOP employee. My name is Bonnie Hernandez. In 2015, I was sentenced to 192 months in prison after pleading guilty to felony charges involving drugs, weapons, and money laundering. I am the mother of two extraordinary daughters, Bailey, who is here with me today, and Madison. They have been my strength and my comfort, and being their mother is truly my proudest accomplishment. I had a steady job in corporate America, but when the company was looking to cut costs, I found myself out of a job. I was desperate to provide for my family, and I got involved in selling and using drugs. I deeply regret what I did, and I've always accepted full responsibility for my actions. In July 2015, I was sent to FCI Tallahassee to serve my time. While there, I had regular access to fresh air and BOP recreational programs, and most importantly, I was able to have video visits with my daughters. All I wanted was to serve my time, pay for my mistakes, and return home to my family as quickly as possible. But I had no idea how high of a price I would end up having to pay. In 2019, my job was reassigned to a new supervisor, Correctional Officer Linton Hatton. Not long after my reassignment, Officer Hatton began showing me extra attention. He brought me contraband like makeup, made sexual comments towards me, and would grope me while we were alone in his office. Eventually, he began repeatedly raping me. Officer Hatton used his power and authority over my body to manipulate and violently abuse me. When I first got to prison, as a part of our orientation, I was made to watch an outdated video on PREA. It warned me about sexual violence from other prisoners, but it did not warn me about violence that might be perpetrated by the people who were paid to protect me. And that video was pretty much the last time I ever received information about my rights under PREA. During my time at Tallahassee, I'd seen what happened to people who'd been groped and abused and who reported it to staff. They were relocated, put in this special housing unit, and retaliated against in ways that made it clear to me that when Hatton came for me, the best thing I could do was to keep my mouth shut about his sexual violence. But eventually, Hatton's violence escalated. It got to the point where I feared for my life and had no choice but to report him, even though I was terrified to do so. When I reported that he had been repeatedly and violently raping me, I too was retaliated against just as I feared. I was called a snitch by others. I was put in the special housing unit. But most upsetting, a few days after reporting, I was transported without my knowledge in the wee hours of the morning from FCI Tallahassee to FDC Miami. FDC Miami is a pretrial detention center. It has no outdoor space, no programming, no jobs, and no technology to facilitate the video calls with my daughters that we depended on. I was cut off from the support systems and outlets at a time when I needed them the absolute most. A few months after I got to FDC Miami, a PREA investigator came to my unit. The guard said that anyone who would like to talk to the investigators were welcome to do so and could wait in line in front of everyone else. I did not even get in that line, but they called my name over the loudspeaker. Everyone saw me go talk to the investigator. The PREA investigator was a day late and $1 short. And it turns out that Officer Hatton was prosecuted for his crimes against me. He was sentenced to 3 months in prison. And do you know, no one even told me that he had been prosecuted and punished for the things he did to me. And by the time he was prosecuted, served his time, and released from custody, I was still sitting in a cell in FDC Miami, completely alone and hopeless. I knew it wouldn't be easy coming forward, but I never thought reporting my abuse would make my life in prison as awful as it was. I was a survivor of crime in federal prison perpetrated by a federal law enforcement officer, but I certainly never felt like anyone had my back or was looking out for me. Thanks to compassion release and the new Sentencing Commission policy statement that allows victims of abuse to seek a reduced sentence, I was released from prison in May of 2024. When I walked out of FDC Miami, it was the first time in 2 years that I had breathed in any fresh air. When I got off the airplane, it was the first time in 2 years that I even saw my daughter's faces. As I sit here, I am only a few months into my freedom. Coming home was one of the happiest moments of my life, and it has also been incredibly difficult. I still have trauma to deal with, the court-ordered therapy, and yet it took 4 months for me to get to see a therapist. I desperately need a job, but red tape has prevented me from getting the paperwork I need for a job. I connected with numerous reentry organizations, but they all have wait lists and criteria that make it difficult to get help. I have to provide urine samples roughly twice a week, and it requires driving each way, yet I still don't have my driver's license back. Luckily, I have the greatest dad in the world, and he drives me where I need to go. But I could not make it to any of my appointments if I had to walk or take an Uber. And so what about the people who don't have what I do? Being here today is among one of the hardest things I have ever done. But I am here for my daughters and here for so many other women I left behind in prison who I knew were being abused. I hope that in sharing my story, it will help make the road ahead for them a little less rocky. Thank you for your time, for giving me the opportunity to share my story, and for your commitment to bettering the lives of people.
Senator Kennedy, and members of the committee. My name is Kelsey Bolar, and I'm the director of IW Features, the storytelling platform at Independent Women's Forum. Every day, we work to amplify real stories to show how public policy affects Americans, aiming to positively influence policy and promote more civil, compassionate, and productive debates. Some of the most devastating stories we've collected at IW Features are those of women who've been harassed, assaulted, or raped in prison as a direct result of policies that allow male inmates to transfer into women's prisons. While every story of sexual abuse is tragic and deserving of attention, what's different about these stories is that every single one of them could have been easily prevented by keeping biological men out of women's prisons. In hope we can urgently address this inhumane punishment of women, today I will share with you 3 stories that we've collected as part of our ongoing documentary series, Cruel and Unusual Punishment, the Male Takeover of Female Prisons. Each of these inmates from Central California Women's Prison, or CCWF, was impacted by SB 132, a California law passed in 2020 that allows males to be housed in female-only prisons by simply declaring a non-male gender. The first is Alyssa Kamholtz. When Alyssa was a little girl, her mother gave her to her stepfather, a member of the notorious Hells Angels motorcycle gang, as a wedding present. For over a decade, Alyssa was subjected to continuous sexual abuse from the gang members. After spending over 20 years in CCWF, her safe place after years of such horrific abuse, the state placed a male inmate with similar physical characteristics as her abusers in Alyssa's room. To make matters worse, Alyssa found out that her new male bunkmate was even affiliated with the same gang of men who abused her as a young girl. Alyssa told us, quote, "I feel like even being sentenced to prison was easier than having to deal with that. Our sentence wasn't to be abused. Kathleen Quinn lost her parole after objecting to SB 132 and reporting that a male repeatedly peeped on her while she used the bathroom naked from the waist down. Kathleen had served nearly 20 years and was only 3 weeks away from her parole date. By that point, her family had already made arrangements for her to come home. But because she reported this man's repeated behaviors and told the prison she did not feel safe living with men, Kathleen now must wait another 5 years in prison. For some female inmates, speaking out means sacrificing an earlier release date and spending more time behind bars. Finally, the third woman, who I will call Jane Doe, shared a bunk bed with Tremaine Carroll, a 6-foot, 2-inch, 200-pound male. 3 days after moving into his cell, Jane was raped by Carroll in the shower. After the assault, Jane told us she has panic attacks daily, takes medication to quell her violent nightmares, and can only shower once every 3 days due to the trauma. While she ultimately changed her mind about going public using her name, she told us she wanted to be the last female inmate raped as a result of policies like SB 132. Sadly, that wasn't the case. Within 24 hours of raping Jane Doe, Tremaine Carroll was credibly accused of raping another victim. The aim of the Prison Rape Elimination Act was to create zero tolerance for prison rape. By allowing men to self-identify as women and transfer into women's prisons, we are not just tolerating rape, but enabling it. Similar to the situation we were in prior to the passing of PRERA, the need for more data on the effects of policies that allow male inmates into women's prisons is obvious. But we shouldn't wait for data to dictate what these stories already make clear. Policies that grant inmates placement based on their self-declared gender identity have already caused demonstrable harm. Nationwide, an estimated 86% of women in jail are sexual violence survivors. As Senator Cory Booker has aptly described it, there's a survivor of sexual trauma to prisoner pipeline. Putting these women directly back into the nexus of their crimes not only puts them in physical danger, it robs them of the opportunity to rehabilitate and heal. Before closing, I would like to thank this committee for its recent decision to oppose judicial nominee Sarah Netburn. Opposing Netburn's nomination was a meaningful step towards protecting our forgotten female inmates, but so much more must be done. Until all female inmates are protected, Independent Women's Forum will continue amplifying their stories so that all Americans understand the inhumanity of locking up female victims of abuse with convicted male rapists, pedophiles, and murderers. This is not a left or a right issue. It is a human issue. Incarcerated women need and deserve female-only spaces. Anything less is a violation of their dignity and their most basic human rights. Thank you for your time, and thank you for allowing me to be a voice for so many women who, for so long, were unable to speak for themselves.
Booker, Senator Kennedy, and members of the subcommittee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify at today's important hearing on the Prison Rape Elimination Act. Sexual abuse is a horrific crime that has no place in any detention facility, and corrections officials have a core responsibility to ensure that every person in their custody is safe and treated with dignity. I've worked in corrections for over 22 years, the last 7 as a PREA coordinator in both adult and juvenile facilities in the great state of South Carolina. I am a board member of the National PREA Coordinators Working Group, which is an organization of PREA coordinators from across the nation who support their peers in implementing PREA standards. I am also retired from the South Carolina Army National Guard and served multiple overseas tours. I have seen the positive impact of PREA on the safety and culture of our institutions. In both juvenile and adult facilities, when I began in corrections, there was a widespread assumption that sexual abuse was not really a problem or that it was an inevitable part of prison life. Staff often didn't know what to do when they learned of sexual abuse, and so it went largely ignored. Now, we are breaking the silence around this abuse. Once a survivor steps forward, our agencies help ensure they get crisis services from trained victim advocates from the community. Despite the progress that has been made and the work that has been done to prevent sexual abuse in detention, it is still happening. Even one person being sexually abused is too many, and there's still more work to be done. For those reasons, I offer the following recommendations for this committee's consideration. First, support states with PREA implementation challenges. Congress can help corrections become stronger in preventing sexual abuse of incarcerated people. Assistance can come in the form of guidance or provisions that support prosecutions of perpetrators of sexual abuse in detention, strengthening consequences for bad faith reporting, helping survivors get assistance with trauma during and after incarceration, and increased funding for the work dedicated to culture change and the promotion of staff safety and wellness, as well as assistance with recruiting additional high-quality correctional staff. Second, support training and education on sexual abuse in detention. Congress should support training and education to help prosecutors, judges, law enforcement, and the greater community understand the prevalence of sexual abuse in correctional facilities and the need to provide substantial consequences to perpetrators in order to deter the behavior, such as pursuing criminal charges and penalties when these actions are taken. Third, increased funding for PREA implementation. The advances that PREA sought required funding to be fully implemented, and additional funding is needed to continue this work. I recommend Congress to continue the PREA grant programs that have been available and increase PREA funding overall. Furthermore, I recommend Congress allow the assurance option to continue, providing funding to support states that are still working on compliance. Next, include state and local corrections in the DOJ's PREA working group. Current correctional practitioners, such as the PREA Coordinators Working Group, need to be members of the Department of Justice PREA Working Group. The DOJ group is tasked with issuing guidance to the field on PREA standards. Current practitioners need to have a seat at that table from states and local jurisdictions. Lastly, pass Senate Bill 1422, the Sexual Abuse Services in Detention Act. A key part of PREA compliance is ensuring that incarcerated survivors of sexual abuse get emotional support services. While some correctional agencies have been able to provide services like we do in South Carolina, others struggle with doing so for various reasons, including lack of capacity. This bill would provide resources for both community rape crisis centers and corrections agencies to facilitate bringing in support services into the prisons and jails. In closing, there are hundreds of dedicated correctional professionals like myself across the nation working hard not only to implement the PREA standards, but to keep people in custody safe. There have been significant strides made since the patches of the PREA standards in 2012. But the reality is, it is not time for the government to take its foot off the gas. Rather, we should be looking to increase the support and to maintain and further improve the safety of facilities. I urge this committee to join us in.
Thank you, Corey. Ms. Hernandez, Bailey and Madison are here?
Bailey, my oldest daughter, is here, yes.
Where's Bailey? Hey, Bailey. Welcome. You were in a federal prison, Ms. Hernandez?
Yes, sir. The FCI Tallahassee.
And when did the rapes by this federal prison employee of you occur? Just what year?
Well, it started in about 2020, and then ended in 2022, August of 2022.
Okay. And you reported him.
I did.
And he was eventually punished.
Correct.
And what was his punishment?
3 months.
Was he prosecuted?
Yes.
I mean, in federal court or state court, if you know?
I don't know if it was state court or not. I know it was in Florida.
Yeah. And he got 3 months for rape?
Yes, sir.
Well, that's part of the problem right there. What you allow is what will continue.
I
I
agree.
mean, 3 months for rape is absurd, much less for repeated rape. Ms. White, let me ask you a question. You talked about inmates violating sexually and being engaging in offensive conduct with respect to female federal prison staff.
Yes, sir.
Are those inmates who do that not punished?
No, sir, not typically.
Why not?
That's a very good question. Oftentimes, the incidents are reported. Our prisons are very overpopulated. Discipline is an issue that we have been struggling with. Even when they are reported, it's handled internally with a small sanction. Typically, they're removed from general population and placed in special housing unit for a limited amount of time and then placed back in general housing. It's not a true punishment, and it definitely is not a deterrent. Oftentimes, those issues are turned over to the AUSA offices who decline to prosecute the inmates.
Okay. Ms. Bolar, let me ask you a couple questions. I want to be sure I understand your testimony. The state of California has a law that says if you're convicted of a crime, you can declare your gender and you can go to a women's prison if you are biologically a male but declare yourself transgender. Is that right?
That is correct.
Okay. Does the state of California require any confirmation of one's gender identity?
There is some type of review process, but it is based on the individual's self-declared gender identity. These individuals don't have to be identifying as transgender or non-binary prior to being convicted and entering prison. It is based on their self-declared gender identity. And I will note that many female inmates we have talked to tell us once they gain access to women's prisons behind closed doors, they are no longer identifying as transgender. They are embracing their natural male identity.
Is this primarily an issue in California, or does your organization get reports from other states?
It is certainly the most pervasive in California, since California was on the forefront, one of the first states in the country to pass this state law. But the BOP also generally recommends housing inmates based on their gender identity. There is, again, a review process there.
Wait, you
where
say the BOPs, that's the federal prison
Bureau
system?
of Prison. Under the Biden-Harris administration, they ordered federal prisons to recognize trans-identified inmates' health and safety when making housing decisions, and even declared for the first time that gender-affirming surgery may be medically appropriate, which means taxpayers would be funding it.
These rapes that you talked about, do we have any idea how many have occurred nationwide?
I think that is one of the problems, and that was one of the problems, my understanding, going into PRERA, that there was a lack of reporting. I can tell you in California, state numbers are that 2,186 trans-identified inmates exist in the state. As of now, I'm aware of 351 of them requesting to go to female
Okay, could you give me those numbers once more? I apologize.
2,186 trans-identified inmates currently exist, according to the latest numbers reported by California. Of those, only 351 of them are actually trying to go into female prisons. And I'd also note in 2022, 1/3 of trans-identifying inmates seeking access to the female prisons were registered sex offenders.
Okay, so there are 2,200 transgender women in women's prisons in California?
Those are just all trans-identified individuals, so they could be biological men or biological women, from my understanding.
Okay. All right, last question, and I've really gone way over here.
Take your time.
Mr. James and Ms. Abbate, give me 30 or 45 seconds if you were President of the United States, what you would do to fix this problem. I was President of the United States.
Microphone, you should say that with more bass in your voice. You're president.
Yes, sir.
You're president,
Yes, sir.
so let it be heard.
As President of the United States, I would do an executive order asking for additional funding for all incarceration facilities across this nation, increase staffing, and push that all correctional facilities have professional employees who are heroes. The reason I would say that is because if you think of the worst things that happens in this country and the worst people who conduct these things, where are they housed? And who is monitoring those individuals where they are? If we look at how we celebrate people in this nation, rightly so, we call our heroes our military, our law enforcement officers, our firefighters, and our EMTs. But we forget the people who monitor the people we call the worst in our country. And so one of the reasons we don't have a robust correctional staffing in this country is because we don't celebrate those people who take the risk to be correctional officers.
Let me ask you this, Mr. James.
Yes, sir.
And I don't disagree with anything you said. How about adding to your list punishing the hell out of people who rape other people in prison?
I agree. But president doesn't make laws, sir.
Yes, sir, but when you get to be president, I'll bet you can get it done.
Yes, sir. Will you vote for me, sir?
Yes, sir.
We all heard that.
Ms. Abbate.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much.
I'm looking for specific, how do we stop this?
So first of all, I think we have to realize that when we over-sentence people for any crimes, we're overpopulating our prisons. At the same time, staffing numbers are dwindling. That is dangerous for incarcerated
I
people.
know, but you can't let people rape other people, whether in prison or outside of prison.
So let's focus on what the people involved in this system need. And the people that are in the prisons need access to outside folks so they can have support, so they can report things safely, so that they can receive counseling from community organizations that can translate into when they leave the facility, so they can have that ability to heal from the trauma and process what's happened to them. We need to ensure that staff are provided with what they need to do their jobs, including adequate training, adequate numbers, the ability to take a day off to go see a kid's recital without having to call in sick because you know you won't be allowed to go, thereby forcing other folks to supplement when you need time off. We have to take care of the people in these institutions because as much as some staff are the problem in this area, all staff are the solution. We have to listen to Ms. White, we have to listen to Mr. James, listen to the field what they need. We have to continue our efforts to enforce these PREA standards. They're providing us with the best answer. We've had criminal laws saying you can't rape anybody anywhere. Raping people in custody has always been against everyone's policies, and yet we still needed to, in 2003, pass the Prison Rape Elimination Act. That's outrageous. So that was designed to study, how does it happen? What is it about these systems? And so I urge us to look at those reasons, look at what came from those discussions, bipartisan discussions, PREA Rape Commission and the commissioners, and see what we came up with at DOJ, ultimately. I think it provides the best answer and the best way to cure the situation, but we have to have adequate funding and attention, and we have to listen to people, we have to believe them, regardless of what color your uniform is. If it's orange, if it's blue or brown, staff are reporting these things, they know what's going on, they are not being listened to. We've got to hold facility and agency leadership accountable and to take action when they find out about this stuff because they know and they don't. And that is not okay. And if agencies aren't listening to their leaders and their staff, you think people didn't know that a warden was raping people? They did. They
Yeah.
reported. Nothing happened. How are women ever supposed to come forward? How are men supposed to come forward who've experienced sexual abuse in custody? We have to support the people that work and live in our prisons.
Well, I want to thank all of you for being here. I've learned a lot. They're blowing up my phone here. You can't hear it because I put it on silent because I've got to be back in my office. So I'm going to have to take leave. I'm asking my staff here and making a note to myself. Ms. Hernandez, I'm going to find out why someone raped you and got 3 months of punishment.
Thank you.
I'm going to find that out. Okay? That's not right.
Thank you.
I mean, that's not justice. And I want to thank my friend, Senator Booker, for calling this hearing. Corey always has interesting topics, and I always learn a lot. And I would have let White House go first if he'd have been here.
I will never bicker if you fail to call me Booker. But I